It's a very succinct, 5-minute rise to fascism.
Yeah.
For the Bane. These are our enemies. These are all responsible, and these who are we're going to punish for that.
Yeah.
I'm the Bane. I'm very big.
And shiny.
And shiny. Suzanne Collins is doing a lot of legwork here to show us all aspects of how everything's bad.
Yeah.
Don't do it.
Yeah.
Welcome back to Nostalgia Club. This is a podcast where we talk about things we like. Us, meaning me, Michael, and two others who are here with me now. No, I'm starting over. It's a mess. How do we start this again?
I'm getting a sense of deja vu right now.
No, how do we start this again?
We just say...
Welcome back to Nostalgia Club. My name is Jino, Jang, and I'm here with my two best subscribers. Make sure to hit that bell.
I think Jino should start it, because this is like Jino's series.
No, it's Suzanne Collins' series.
Welcome back to Nostalgia Club. This is a podcast where me and my friends, two of which are laughing uproariously because there's been several false starts, talk about media that we love from our past, from the present, and today especially it's going to be media from the past in two different regards because we are revisiting the Underland Chronicles. The first book in the series is called Gregor the Overlander, which you may recognize from episode 2 of this podcast. We talked about it. Written by Suzanne Collins, the famed author of The Hunger Games, that you probably have heard more of since those took the world by storm and became the first foray, I think the kind of the vanguard of the big YA movement.
The YA dystopia movement.
Yes. Yeah. And then those became movies, but much less recognized is the Underland Chronicles that Collins wrote back in sort of the early 2000s, or at least that's when they were published. I, at this point, want to introduce the two other people who are here with me, now that I've given that brief rundown, starting with the person to my left.
I'm Victoria. Nice to meet you.
And
I'm Jino, and I would like to apologize for the inaccuracies stated in the first Gregor podcast. I was young and foolish and
it's okay.
Hadn't read the books in a long, long time, but we're fixing that today. This is my redemption arc. I'm going to say true things that are true in this part 1 of our Suzanne Collins 2-part extravaganza. I guess it's technically part 2. Who knows?
I guess it is, huh? We
Yeah.
did Gregor the Overlander 2 seasons ago, and now we're basically doing the rest of the series. Mm-hmm. We all read books 2 through 5.
Yeah. And then next week, we're going to be talking about the Hunger Games.
Yes.
Because we thought it'd be interesting to see the common themes and just analyze both of these series back to back.
And how great Suzanne Collins is.
She's so great.
She's so great.
Fantastic. She was originally a writer for children's television?
Yeah.
Do we know
scripts.
for what shows?
Nope.
Wow. Just sort of in the dark there, much like much of the Underland. How about that? No, but we talked about...
I can look it up if you want.
Well, for all I know, because I did a little Googling, but I didn't do a deep dive. Normally this stuff is sort of forthcoming, on Wikipedia pages, but maybe it's not super forthcoming.
I got it.
Oh.
I got it. Wubsy. The Wubsy Show.
Oh.
Clifford's Puppy Days. Little Bear. Oswald.
She wrote for Little Bear. I wonder if it was a reboot Little Bear. Because I thought Little Bear was rather old. Then again, Suzanne Collins is rather older than I, so maybe it was OG Little Bear.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. A lot of Little Bear. Generation O. More. Oh, wow. A lot of Little Bear.
Well, I love Little Bear. I grew up on Little Bear, so...
And you can really feel the influences of Little Bear. Much like Little Bear, there are animals. And that's
it.
None of them are bears as it goes. Not in the Underland.
You missed the chapter where the bears show up.
Traditional underground animals.
Can you imagine? Because
bats,
all
and
of the
bears.
creatures in the Underland are bigger than they are in our world. The cockroaches are giant cockroaches, and the rats are giant rats. Can you imagine how big a bear would
extra
be?
giant bear. Well, they have regular-sized livestock, it seems.
Yeah. I forgot about that.
Which, when you compare a regular-sized cow with an extra giant cockroach, you're like, okay, that's, whoa. But yeah, so a brief overview. The Underland Chronicles chronicles the adventures primarily of the protagonist Gregor, who falls through a grate in the laundromat of his family's apartment building, chasing after his very young, like toddler-aged sister Boots, where he comes across an underground civilization of human beings known as the Regalians, and discovers he is some kind of warrior of prophecy who features in multiple prophecies these Regalians have, written by their original founder,
Bartholomew of Sandwich.
Bartholomew of Sandwich.
I always want to say Earl of Sandwich.
Same. Love those sandwiches.
I've actually never been.
They're pretty good.
Okay.
Sandwich founded the city of Regalia like 400 years ago or something, citing that the overland was going to be destroyed or whatever, leads everyone underground, writes a bunch of prophecies, proceeds to peace out. And now there's...
refuses to elaborate.
Starts a, like monarchical sort of society. They have like a council or whatever. But then you have all these humans who've been living in the Underland, engaging with sentient, extra-large rats and cockroaches and spiders and bats, the last of which they have a close relationship with, as individual humans are typically bonded to a flyer, as they're called. All these Underland creatures have their own name. And the series is basically about Gregor being involved in all this stuff and having to grapple with essentially being pressed into wars and morally ambiguous situations and getting traumatized. And wow, it's just a doozy.
Because these animals aren't just loose. They are societies as complex and equal, perhaps, in power to the human society. So it's not just like adventure with the animals. It's like international conflict and politics and trade agreements and war crimes.
Lots of war crimes.
Yeah.
And we're not just saying that as like a funny, like, Matthias from Redwall did a war crime. Like, no, that's a main theme of the book, of the book series. Suzanne Collins, in an interview, once said that the Hunger Games were about the concept of a just war, not literally a just war, but the concept of a just war. And Gregor the Overland series is about an unjust war that becomes a just war. And how different peoples and different nations will justify the use of violence, justify going to war.
Yeah. These books devastated me.
When Victoria finished, she posted to Jino and I a picture of, if you've ever seen the meme of like that, like slightly higher resed stick figure lying on the ground in a pool of tears, just crying.
Yeah,
which
that
is
was
pretty
me.
much the vibe. I sent you all an article on book hangovers, which I'm sure everyone who's read a book has experienced like a book hangover where you're like, oh, well, the rest of my day's kind of shot. And this book will really put you in that state. I gotta say, when I was a kid, mentioned this in the first time we covered Gregor, I left off at book 3.
Right. So this is your first time going through 4 and 5.
Yeah. And I really want to like say thank you to both of you, of course, because y'all have the most involved part of like doing this podcast, and y'all make the plans, and then I show up and be a goofy guy.
And we appreciate it.
And I gotta say thank you to Jino especially for being so tied to these books and wanting us to definitively explore them, because it's nice to close that loop from my past. It's a double-edged sword, because I know that if I had finished these books when I was a kid, I would have probably been as devastated as young Jino was at the end of book 5.
Here's the thing, though. Young Jino was devastated for a different reason than older Jino was devastated for in my most recent read-through. Because young Jino was devastated because Gregor was never going to see Luxa again, and their young love would never come to pass, and it's so sad.
Hey, I think they are pretty cute, though.
They are pretty cute.
They are pretty cute.
Older Jino was devastated because hundreds of thousands of people died, and it was terrible.
Present-day 30-year-old Michael was bummed for both.
Yeah, no, they're both valid.
I was legitimately surprised, though, because in those first 3 books, Gregor and Luxa, their relationship is like...
tense.
It's tense mostly. And there's a lot of legwork done in books 4 and 5 that really like reinforces the like... I'm saying like a lot, but it's tough to grasp. Like the way in which they rely on each other in particular. And after all they've been through, there's kind of this way that Suzanne Collins settles them in a number of very... intimate is the wrong word because they're 12, and intimate has implications, but like they
connect with each other.
They connect with each other, and they can relax around each other. And there's a number of little vignettes where like Lux is taking a break from basically being a queen, or Gregor's taking a break from being
the warrior.
And they're just able to like find solace in each other's presence in a way that's like sort of unexpected at the end of the series, given how tense they'd been with each other the entire time.
Yeah.
And so by the end, when they have to separate from each other, they feel way beyond their years, which in a way I suppose they are, having been through war as basically child soldiers at that point.
Yeah. I think Gregor's isolation hits so much harder at the end of the book because part of it is he has to go back to the Overland where no one can understand what he's been through.
Yeah.
Although his family did go down with him, he had a very different experience than they did. And so really, I think the person who can understand the most is Luxa.
Yeah.
Which is rough because he could never see her again.
Jino brought this up in our first foray. Suzanne Collins being the child of a military guy and how she traveled around when she was a kid. Her father, I think, flew planes in the Korean War.
I think so.
And the way she talks about war in these books, she says, is influenced by the way her father would talk about these mature concepts to his kids. And how do you explain something like this in a way that a kid can sort of understand? It very much feels like at the end of the series, I mean, at the end of book one as well, but at the end of the series in particular, this is such a palpable depiction of like what it must be like. I mean, it almost feels like a little too, like, I don't want to overstep my bounds in this regard, especially because the man who is or has been our boss, Casey Wayland, is a veteran himself. But there's like such a very clarion depiction of Gregor as a veteran with PTSD dealing with it, like representing the concept of a veteran who returns from war and feels like he belongs nowhere.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And like literally at the end of the series, there's that line where he's like, I was preparing this whole time to die. I learned how to die and how to be prepared for that. And now I have to like learn how to live. And that's like, oh gosh. I know we're jumping into the weeds already, and by we I mean me. But like it was such a bracing series, such a bracing book. I mean this doesn't, given that this is coming out before the Hunger Games, I don't know how it spells for the lead up, but I think I like this series more than I like the Hunger Games. And it's shocking because it's geared toward a younger audience. But I feel like the way it handles its concepts, its words escape me.
Every book, every chapter, and every character is specifically designed to communicate to children why war is bad, but not in the sense of like war bad because people hurt each other and that's bad. But war is bad because of a variety of complicated interpersonal but also societal consequences that ripple off of the, quote, heroic act of declaring war.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Or even just the concept of having enemies, of being so committed to being the enemy of a different group that you ignore logic and thus devastate yourself. I mean, yeah, it's like you said, like from what I understand, one of the biggest ways that PTSD manifests itself in people is their inability to connect with other people who've not experienced it, which is why support groups are so important for people who've gone through trauma, is the ability to talk to someone who also understands. In Gregor's case, you know, the only people who can understand are his family. And equally tragic at the very end of the series, because he's with Boots and he's thinking about how, maybe not in that scene specifically, but he has thought about how Boots won't remember the Underland. And so even though they've gone through basically all of the same experiences together, they will never connect on it because she can't remember the Underland because she's a baby and can't let that affect how she grows up.
Yeah.
Lizzie will be able to
Poor
a little
Lizzie.
more. Poor Lizzie. Oh, Lizzie's Gregor's anxious younger sister, not as young as Boots. Victoria, you mentioned when Lizzie shows up that you practically cried when because of her interactions with Rip Red, who we haven't talked about as much. Rip Red, the bedraggled, world-weary rat who's like a mentor character for Gregor the whole series. Very grouchy, but has a soft spot.
I think Lizzie's character is really interesting because she's the middle child, but she also doesn't go to the Underland until the very last book. And even then, it's out of pure necessity. But Lizzie shows a different side to war, where Lizzie is the one who's at home worrying for the family members who are gone, who are away from home. And it's things like she's worried to go to summer camp because she's like, what if you guys aren't here when I get back? Or in like the fourth book, their mom has to stay in the Underland to receive treatment for the man-made plague. Not man-made plague, but the human-spread plague. Lizzie feels guilty that she can't go to see her mom just because she just can't handle the thought of going down there. But she's like wrestling with all this guilt of like, I want to see my mom. I haven't seen her in months, but I also physically can't handle that environment. And yeah, the moment made me cry because the most interaction she has with the Underland until she goes down there is the stories that Gregor tells her. And Gregor tells her a lot about Rip Red, who has been teaching Gregor how to use echolocation to fight in the dark. And Gregor's really bad at it. But Lizzie always says, oh, can you send these baked goods down to Rip Red, or just tell him I say hi. And so even though Rip Red and Lizzie have never met, she has like a soft spot for Rip Red. And then when she first shows up in the Underland, the way that it's described in the book, just like, it really got me because it's like, up until this point, you see Rip Red through Gregor's eyes, where Gregor's like, Rip Red hates me. He thinks I'm so annoying. I think Rip Red's annoying. I can't do this echolocation thing. He's being so hard on me. And then when Rip Red sees Lizzie, it's like all of his features soften because he has a soft spot for her. And he's just like, hi, Lizzie. And it's so cute. I really like their relationship because Rip Red sees his daughter in Lizzie, the daughter that he lost. And yeah, it's just sweet. I'm not formulating thoughts very coherently, but overall, I think that was probably one of my favorite just character dynamic moments, because also I think it just made me see Rip Red in such a different light after that point. So
yeah, it really is very like late in the game when we get Rip Red's full backstory and learn the full details. That's something I really liked about these books, is that even as late as the final book in the series, we're learning details about characters, even characters who have like already left the narrative, like more or less permanently. We're learning details about them that reframe our understanding not only of them, but of other characters.
yeah.
Even Hamnet, poor Hamnet, who dies in book 3.
Oh, yeah.
Vicus and Solivet's son. We learned that like Solivet locked him in like a dungeon for like a month for defying her in like a war room, and we're like, oh, that doesn't totally reframe my understanding of Hamnet, but it does especially reframe my understanding of Solivet even more. I already know she's a war criminal who like ordered the engineering of like a plague, but now I know that she had the capacity to like lock up her own son and put him through like psychological torture. Just fascinating stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Even Henry. Like Henry, who dies in the first book, we keep getting more Henry backstory through all the rest of the series. Like, oh, like Luke said, Henry used to play games here, and this is how we know this secret tunnel. Or like Henry learned, like taught Luke this, or Henry, accomplished this. And even if it's not like directly impacting Henry's character or the plot, it's just a constant reminder that like just because someone died doesn't mean their impact on your lives or their presence in this group of people just like evaporates.
Yeah.
Like the ghost is still here. And for Gregor, it's literally feels like a ghost haunting him because Henry betrayed him and he just can't shake him.
Yeah.
He just keeps showing up.
There's like a lot of nuance there too, because whenever they talk about their memories with Henry after Henry's big betrayal in book 1, and he was obviously like a crueler influence outside of like the truth of his betrayal. He was generally a ostracizing sort of character, a little more demeaning and aggressive. When characters recall their memories with him, there's like obviously good memories or like instrumental memories to characters' experiences. Ares, Gregor's bonded bat, used to be Henry's. And when, he and Gregor are traveling through the caverns and Gregor's like, how do you know about all these back routes? Ares is like, this is what Henry and I discovered.
Gregor keeps following in Henry's footsteps.
Yeah.
And it makes him furious because he's like, how can I be like Henry? But it keeps being like Henry.
Yeah.
And it's just that nuance. It's like you can't totally extricate a person from your life in both the good and the bad influence that they had. There's a lot of like, and this is like got to be a testament to the way Suzanne Collins writes, because I think you see it in the Hunger Games too. But it's like there's a lot of embracing things as they come. And it's something that Gregor especially learns, since he's our main point of view character, our really only point of view character, by the end of book 5, is that, and Rip Red's like this practically the whole time, which is life comes at you fast. There's a lot that's bad and there's a fair amount that's good, and you just got to take it as it comes. And, you enjoy the moments of happiness and humor, and you struggle through the moments of hardship, and that's like your only choice. And it's like, book 5, Rip Red can go from being involved in like an extremely hard battle at like the top of the book and like holding back a whole army in a tunnel and, barely escaping an inferno. And then a few days later, he's just like in the code room, just gorging himself on like shrimp and cream sauce, his favorite food. And whenever an opportunity for a joke comes up, Rip Red's there to like make it, especially if it's at someone else's expense.
Yeah.
There's a lot of like honesty in that. It's like an epitomization of like living in the moment. And even Gregor learns that by the end of the series as well, where like all of the tension with Luxa and all of these like feelings and uncertainties that he has kind of like evaporate away when he's like, there's really we don't have any time other than like the present moment. Like, I'm just going to be honest with this person.
Yeah.
And like a lot of that pretense between all sorts of characters just like falls away when they have like no choice but to acknowledge that. Like, all I have is sort of like the moment I have in front of me. And it's like, I don't know, it like all moves very naturally. It all weaves very naturally into like the character's journey and like the story. And it's like, I don't know, it's at the very least like a very important reminder.
I would love to get your thoughts on Rip Red more, because he is probably the most complex character in the series.
Yeah.
Like, what do you think of him? Just in general. What are your thoughts? I can tell you my thoughts as a kid, because as a kid, my view of Rip Red was really high. I thought he was really cool. He was a cool rat. He was the good guy rat,
Yeah.
Killing other rats like a good rat does. But reading back through it, knowing the context of where he gets to and where he comes from, he's a really gray character. Even up until the very end, he's willing to kill Luxa to achieve his own goals after everything they've been through.
Yeah.
And Gregor has to step in and stop it. So it's difficult to place him in like a good guy, bad guy category, and even to place him in the geopolitics of the world. In the very first book, he's almost like a traitor revolutionary.
Yeah.
If that's what you could, he's like a revolutionary and then becomes like a faction leader, and then he becomes like an outcast hermit, and then he becomes a general of the enemy or something like that. And then snap, suddenly he's the rat's leader. So it's a crazy, bouncing back and forth across geopolitics.
Yeah. Oh, it's so hard because it's like, I think mostly he does kind of do things for himself. I think he's maybe kind of in the mindset of, I just have to look out for myself. So which side is going to benefit me the most, or what decision is going to be the most advantageous for me? I think it also, one of the themes in, I think, the 4th and 5th book is whether Sandwich's prophecies are to be believed.
Yeah.
And Gregor kind of wrestles with it, especially because when Gregor finally reads the final prophecy, it says that the warrior is supposed to die. So, of course, Gregor is like,
Uh-oh.
I don't know about that one.
Do you think Sandwich is legit? Throwing a lot of questions
That's
at you.
the great part, though, because you're like,
I mean, okay, they do make a really interesting point of saying that regardless of whether Sandwich's prophecies are real or not, so many times in past history, there have been times where they're like, okay, this is it. This is the prophecy. It's happening. And then it doesn't pan out exactly the way that they thought it would. And they're like, oh, we just misinterpreted it, or it's not the right timing, or we made a mistake.
Yeah.
So obviously it's so easy to match certain events to specific meanings according to Sandwich's prophecies. And when Rip Red tells Gregor, yeah, I don't believe in Sandwich's prophecies at all, Gregor is really surprised because of the amount of times that they've been in meetings. And Rip Red's like, yeah, so like Lizzie is the second princess and Gregor is the warrior, et cetera, et cetera. It kind of reframes Gregor's whole thinking of, am I actually supposed to die? Do I have free will to decide whether I die in a situation or not? And then at the very end of the series, Gregor notices, because there's like a whole, like, what was it, the prophecy of the peacemaker?
Yeah.
Yeah, something about an X.
Yeah, like, the peacemaker will be marked with an X. And Rip Red shows up in the room when they're trying to decide what's going to happen to the rats. How is territory going to get redistributed? And he shows up and he has an X on his face in the form of
a scar,
a battle wound.
Yeah,
that will probably become a scar. Although this is when Gregor notices, Yeah, that second slash is not that deep. It doesn't really look like someone was really attacking you. It kind of feels like you did that yourself.
Even Lexa calls it out. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know if you made that slash deep enough. It may not scar over.
It might not scar. You might not keep the X that calls you the so-called peacemaker.
And Ripred's like, what are you talking about?
Yeah. So basically, Ripred says himself, like, I just take whatever interpretation of the prophecy is most beneficial to me at the time. I think that's kind of his overall philosophy on life, which is I am in control of my own life and I'm just going to do whatever it takes to get what I want, which I think is interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think you touch on something there that I think is like, my sort of interpretation of Ripred is like, on the one hand, and this will sound like it's the opposite of yours, but I don't think it is. I think Ripred is like, after his whole backstory thing where he's like, I lost my whole family and my pups in like a surprise attack battle that turned into a war crime that no one wanted, that got out of control, and I determined something had to change. I think his like whole philosophy is I will do whatever it takes to try and make everything as peaceful and stable as possible.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that, and he has some justification to this given how absolutely clever he is, how smart and also very capable as a warrior is, but primarily how smart he is and how shrewd. He definitely like conflates his influence and leadership with the pursuit of that end. And so whenever he is pursuing, trying to stabilize things, primarily, more than anything, I would say it's primarily for the rats, and I'll get into that. Whenever he's pursuing that, he is also like prioritizing himself.
Yeah.
Because he sees that, like the pursuit of that cause as synonymous with his personal, like, continuation, his survival. But simultaneously, he recognizes the power of the prophecy with the Regalians. And he recognizes, it seems like, the Regalians' influence and power. And he's probably, it seems like he's worked out, and given that he seemed to get along with a number of Regalians in more peaceful times, he's using whatever social connections he has and whatever access to power that he has to try and set things up in such a way that he can like help write the letter of the law for like a new age that will keep things as peaceful as possible. And he's willing to sort of do whatever it takes to reach that end.
He's great because he gets the Regalians more than they understand themselves.
Yeah.
So he's able to basically play them like a fiddle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's even a line, and it's, oh gosh, like it feels so great when, because Ripred is, they think he died in the final battle. And then like he comes like beaten and bloodied like into that arena, like crawls out of one of like the holes in the ground that like the moles, which we haven't even talked about, dug into the arena, and is like, I'm here to speak for the rats. And you're like, whoa. And Gregor even recognizes like, oh my gosh, I think this is the exact moment Ripred has been working toward. Like, he's
waited for
life.
all of the domino pieces to fall, and this is his moment.
Yeah, and it's like, whoa.
He's out here playing
plan.
like 4D chess.
The Regalians are playing like 1D chess.
Yeah.
Gregor's playing checkers.
Is 1D chess
a straight line?
Oh, yeah.
I think it's an apt metaphor because it's literally a straight line, and so you can't win.
Yeah.
You can't do anything. It's like a pawn and then the king. And what?
Yeah.
Nothing.
They've got their prophecies and they're going in a straight line with it. Sort of. Even if they're not, they think they are.
They think they are.
I love your take. You're like, he's like some sort of like revolutionary kind of, because it's definitely like his vibe. Like, oh, this guy's definitely done some real sketchy stuff. And it's like you get the sense that he really cares for the people he cares about, and that he will like keep his word to Gregor in terms of like, I'll make sure your family gets out if you don't.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you're like, he's constantly measuring things in the balance. So like, do you have more to say on Ripred in that regard?
Ripred to me is really fascinating because he's like a revolutionary leader without a revolution to lead for most of the series. Like he has, I don't know if I would call them followers, maybe just like accomplices.
Yeah.
People who are willing to
sympathizers.
Yeah, sympathizers. But really he's trying to enact great societal change within the rats and also consequently in the Regalians outside of the system, by like diving in and messing something up or fixing something and then diving back out. And I think his selfishness is what really sets him apart from like other revolutionary figures, even in Collins' own writing.
Yeah.
Have either of you watched Andor?
Yeah.
I don't want to spoil anything for people watching, but there's a speech in Andor that
Luthen Rail.
Yeah, that basically sums up as that, like, I sacrifice myself for the cause, knowing that I will never enjoy the fruits of my success if I do succeed. And Rip Red says, I will sacrifice myself from the cause and I will enjoy the fruits of my success. And no one's going to stop me.
Yeah.
Which makes him a really interesting character because even at the very end, I'm never fully on his side.
Yeah.
As the leader of the rats, he almost falls into the fallacy of we just need a good king. Like the system isn't broken. There's just a bad king.
Yeah.
And we need a good king to step in and use the system, which isn't broken, to make good things happen.
Yeah.
And it's me.
And it's me. Rip Red isn't changing how I mean, I assume he isn't changing how the rats work. He's just stepping in and saying, I will lead the rats. And this is my complicated domino web at how I'll get there.
It's the difference between a coup and like a revolution or whatever.
Yeah.
I think I got that from somewhere, but I forget what. But it's an important distinction.
He only keeps the Bane around as long as it benefits him. And then as soon as the Bane becomes a threat to his authority or his eventual authority, he tries to kill the Bane.
Yeah.
And then similarly, he keeps Luxo around as long as it helps him. And as soon as Luxo tries to threaten his new power, he's ready to kill Luxo.
Yeah.
So kid Jino loved Rip Red, and adult Jino goes, I don't know about that Rip Red guy.
Yeah.
It's fascinating, though.
It's really fascinating.
And then it's extra because he can see the winds change when Gregor, because, you know, in that last scene when Luxa and Rip Red are like, all right, Gregor, like, whose side are you going to be on in this? And Gregor's like, I'm done. And breaks the sword. And then you can see, like, they all realize the winds have changed. And Rip Red in particular is like, all right, we can talk now. Like, okay, you're willing to talk? Okay, then we'll talk. And then I love Lizzie's, I love how Lizzie gets sort of like, it's sort of like, done in by my own kid kind of thing. Like my own, like, little, like, the person I had a soft spot for. Because Lizzie's the one at the end who says, okay, this whole, like, committee, this delegation where you have multiple people from different delegations that are elected by their own people to come in and debate are all yelling at each other. What if, like, the representatives, what if you just get one and the representative is elected by the other groups? And, like, of course, Rip Red is not elected by the other groups. And obviously, like, if we want to talk about the applications of that, there's room for all sorts of abuses with that. But it's about finding your way. And, like, maybe that'll work for the Underland. And it's a wonderful little button on it where you realize the people that are going to be, like, hashing out peace treaties or, like, negotiations and deals and working with each other are kind of a lot of characters we've gotten maybe a little from, but they're largely secondary or tertiary or even, like, foreigner,
or even just quote a mole whose name no one could pronounce, unquote, just like, and a mole.
Just like we all elected people that seemed like we could just sort of talk to them. People that we're not afraid to talk to. Like, we'll bring Marith up from the humans. Marith, who's a decent guy, and he's a doctor. He's a doctor. Or was Howard's the doctor?
Howard's the doctor.
What's Marith?
I think maybe you think he's a doctor because he's always at the hospital with Gregor.
Oh.
He lost his leg in the first book. I think he was on the quest with, I don't remember.
Maybe it was book 2.
Book 2. A lot of characters.
But he's like an ex-soldier.
Yeah. And he's the one
just around.
He's just around.
I think Gregor really trusts his advice. Especially because Gregor spends a lot of time at the hospital with Marith.
He does spend a lot. I forgot how much hospital time Gregor gets. Which, I mean, justified. He really goes through it. But no, you're right. I really like what Rip Red said at the end, where he's like, they will come to a decision that no one will be happy with, and that's what's important.
Everyone will feel like they got taken advantage of, but they'll be happy that everyone else feels like they got taken advantage of. And
I do think it's interesting that the piece at the end of the series is very tenuous. Where it's kind of like right now when Rip Red and Luxa have come to, I mean, they form a bond, which I think is interesting. Luxa pledges a bond to Rip Red, similar to the bond that the Regalians pledge with their bats, which is like a life or death bond.
And weirdly, I think, like, I was expecting a darker ending where it feels like, oh, this thing's just going to cycle through violence all over again, and Gregor's just going to get out. But it feels like there's legitimate hope.
At
least for one generation.
At least for one generation.
Yeah, it's like, for as long as, like, these two are alive, it feels like things will work out. But at the same time, I mean, if you're a pessimist, you could be like, well, as soon as one of them dies, it's over. But at the same time, I do think that the impact of that bond even happening will hopefully ripple throughout their societies.
You could see it forming a precedent.
Yeah.
And with like the amount of like cultural significance of it, particularly for the Regalians, you could see at the very least Rip Red, as shrewd as he is, seeing like it would not benefit me at all to do something that would like put this bond in jeopardy, because this is a pretty ironclad thing.
Yeah, and everyone witnessed it happen.
Yeah.
The moles.
The moles.
The moles.
So the moles we get introduced to in the middle of book 5, and we quickly get, oh yeah, so we didn't tell you this, Gregor, but when Sandwich first came down, he genocided the moles, or at least he tried to, because he wanted the land.
Yeah.
And then he went crazy and wrote a bunch of prophecies and died.
And Gregor goes, and you guys are all cool with him? And the Regalians are like, yeah, we're pretty cool. And Gregor's like,
They do the thing where they're like, we're not exactly proud of what happened back then, but it's been a long time. And it's like, okay, that doesn't really, you haven't improved too terribly much on that track record.
Something I wanted to throw in there is, well, first of all, I don't like Sandwich.
Oh, yeah, no. Young Jino was like, Sandwich is pretty cool. And older Gino's like, oh, Sandwich is a bad guy.
Yeah.
I mean, he came to the Americas in the 1600s.
Yeah.
He was...
How good could he be?
Yeah. But I did see someone point out that Sandwich and Hamnet have similar stories where they both committed war crimes for the sake of, quote unquote, protecting their people. But Sandwich is portrayed more in a negative light, at least in Gregor's eyes, whereas Vicus is more admiring of Sandwich. Hamnet is portrayed more positively in Gregor's eyes, but then he's like totally ostracized by the Regalians.
Yeah.
I just think it's interesting that even at this stage, Suzanne Collins is throwing in these characters where it's like, it's up to you personally to decide what you think about these characters. You are shown what Gregor thinks of these characters and what the other characters think about these figures. They can't speak for themselves anymore because they're dead. And who's to say that even the story that Gregor is told about Sandwich doesn't have its own inaccuracies and biases?
Yeah.
I think it's Collins's way of saying, I'm not assigning a moral right or wrong to these characters, but these are the things that do happen in war, and it's kind of up to you to decide how you feel about them.
Yeah, that's often a debate that I see online with just any popular franchise.
Yeah.
When you have a character who is a villain who then gets redeemed, people often looking from an outside perspective into that series will look at like the list of atrocities that characters committed, and even though the story redeems them, they will say that this character cannot be redeemed. And so I think it's a really interesting debate of like, where's the line? Like, how much do you have to do to justify your own redemption in like an audience's eyes? Hamnet did do a terrible thing, but as a reader and from Gregor's perspective, because you see the
change he makes after that.
Yeah, but also you see like the situation he was coming from. Being in solitary for a month?
Yeah.
Like being in solitary for any amount of time is terrible.
Being raised by Solivet.
Yeah. So you see like the context surrounding him. With Sandwich, all we get was he led a bunch of people down here, did a little crime, and then wrote a bunch of stuff on the wall that might not even be accurate, but informed an entire civilization for like hundreds of years.
Yeah.
It's like we get very little on who the guy was.
Yeah. Made the most ostentatious sword known to man, then faded in from existence.
Yeah. On that note, I do want to talk about Solivet, because I think she's also one of those characters where it's like, ooh, we're crossing a lot of lines. It's like every time you're like, oh, she's definitely crossed the line. And then you're like, oh, no, she's really crossed the line. And then you're like, oh, yeah. Well, okay, basically in book 3, it's revealed that Solivet asked the scientist to take this plague and study it in the lab in order to create an antidote. So then they could then distribute the plague amongst the rats and then be like, oh, surprise, we have an antidote.
Did they ever explicitly say that that was the plan? Or was it like a conclusion they drew like, oh, if the humans have the cure for this plague, then they could leverage the plague?
I mean, we never got to actually see Solivet on trial, or really even the scientist on trial. The scientist basically just gets executed off screen, and Gregor is like, oh my gosh. And then Solivet is put in jail to await trial, but then the war starts and they're like, oh, we need her back.
Which from a structural standpoint, that's bonkers.
Yeah.
To have a character that is present through the entire book, like a sympathetic presence. And then suddenly, as soon as you learn that they've done something terrible, you don't even see them go. They're just gone.
Yeah.
There's no closure, which I think is definitely on purpose.
I specifically remembered when I read it back on this reading, like it threw me. And I remembered when I was a kid being thrown as well, because we see her for like 3 or 4 different scenes in that book.
Yeah.
She helps the main characters on multiple occasions.
She does. And
helps,
you can tell.
quote, helps.
Yeah. And you can tell like she's like
she really gets thrown under the bus by Solivet.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
and the Regalian Council in general, who like there's like a subcommittee that like commissioned this thing to be done, led by Solivet, and like when she's called out by Luxa, she doesn't like fight it. She's like been a nervous wreck the whole time because she's like she knows she's like messed up, and she immediately is like, "I'm sorry, I didn't think this would happen. I was just following orders." And when they go to lead her away, she doesn't resist. She's just like extremely like she's pale. She's falling apart.
She knows what's coming.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. And then when Gregor wakes up from being in the hospital again, because of course, Marith is there and he's like, yeah, so we're distributing the antidote. Naviv's been executed. Solivet's on trial. And we're like, whoa, Naviv is dead? He's like, yeah, well, she committed crimes against Regalia, so she's been executed. Anyway, do you need anything? Do you need any water? And it's like, whoa.
Yeah. So back to your original question, they don't officially confirm like whose plan was it and where did they get the plague from? I think they're saying like technically the plague was still taken from the jungle, but then the scientist was told to take samples of that and study it in the lab and create an antidote for it. And then one day Ares gets injured and goes to the scientist for medicine.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, but then he knocks over the plague samples and thereby gets infected with the plague. And that's how it spreads.
I guess it is implied that the intended use, even if it wasn't intended to be used immediately, was for a weapon, because it was like the military commission that like commissioned
Yeah, well, they
it
do. They do confirm that they did intend to use it as basically a weapon in the war, but the actual, I mean, obviously, I think it's just at that point, the cause of the plague is not as important as
the fact that it's here.
The fact that it exists.
And the reaction of the Regalians.
Yeah.
Which, to be clear, at the time they commissioned this weapon, there was no war.
Yeah.
They were in a state of peace. And Solivet was like, but what if I did something?
Yeah.
Which is again, the theme of an unjust war. Like, from, I guess, a third-party perspective, there is no justification for basically anything that happens in the first four books. And it's
no justification in the 4th book for what the Bane does to the Nibblers.
For what the Bane does.
Yeah.
But even it could be argued that the Bane's actions were directly caused by human actions, because their previous war took a big chunk of rat territory, which caused the rats to starve, and so the rats invaded the mice, and then the mice went to the humans, and the humans were like, no, and then the humans did this, and then the rats did this.
Well, so it's like the path of history. It's like events lead to each other. Obviously, there's nothing that justifies what the Bane does,
no,
but
definitely.
there are contributing factors to, like, you know, the social movement that allows the Bane to take power.
Yeah, it's a very succinct, like, 5-minute rise to fascism.
Yeah.
For the Bane.
It definitely feels like a reference to World War II, Nazi Germany, and that whole thing.
These are our enemies. These are our responsible, and these who are we're going to punish for that.
Yeah.
I'm the Bane. I'm very big.
And shiny.
And shiny.
Pearl pelt.
But it's interesting that 3 is like an attempted genocide by the humans with a backstory war crime, and then 4 is like an attempted genocide by the rats with a secondary war crime backstory.
Yeah.
It's all very... Suzanne Collins is doing a lot of legwork here to show us all aspects of how everything's bad. Don't do it.
Yeah, that's true.
And it doesn't feel manipulative.
No.
It doesn't feel like she's trying to give us a specific, like, take on something.
Like, there are no good guys.
Like, the only thing she's telling us is, war's bad. Maybe we should try to avoid that if possible, but she's not saying, like, it's stupid that people would ever go to war. It's like, no, this has, like, been with us forever.
Yeah.
And there's reasons that it happens. And even if we don't want it to happen and we should pursue it not happening at all costs, we can't just ignore the fact that it does exist and that there are reasons that people ultimately choose to do this kind of stuff.
Yeah. Going back to Solivet, like, even with Solivet after arguably an irredeemable thing that she did in book 3, even Ripred is willing to team up with Solivet in book 5 when they're in the midst of war.
Yeah.
Like, Ripred and Solivet actually, like, work together quite frequently in the war room. And Gregor's just kind of, like, in disbelief because he still is like, Solivet unleashed a plague, and she was supposed to go to trial, and you're just gonna let her have say over the entire Regalian military? And everyone's just kind of like, I mean, yeah, because we need her. Yeah, like you said, again, like Suzanne Collins doesn't tell us you should think Solivet is good or bad, but she does a really great job of just showcasing all of the wide spectrum of how people will deal with or react to war.
Yeah.
I think Gregor's perspective also, like the fact that it's from Gregor's perspective is really important.
Yeah.
It gives you the added leniency of being able to be like, okay, here's all the information, but I'm going to lean you in this direction. Like,
That's true,
Sandwich, not a great guy. Solivet, I don't know about that.
Yeah. But also his, at least at first, his inexperience in any of this lets him look at a situation right up front and go like, all of this is messed up.
Yeah.
You guys must understand that. And all the other characters are forced to say, yes, we do, and we're doing it anyway.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
they acknowledge it, and then they go ahead anyway. And then you also see Gregor's descent as he gets, I don't know what the right word is, indoctrinated
A
into
little bit,
being
yeah.
a
Yeah.
warrior to the point where like that's all, like it's like you said, like he, or someone said, he learned how, I'm pointing like the audience can see this happening. Like he learned how to die, now he has to learn how to live. Like you can see him learning how to die. And he like really likes it by the end of it, which
Yeah.
he can't even comprehend it in his own psyche. Like, I like this. Why do I like this? Because it's all I know.
Yeah.
I think in book 3 and 4 is when Gregor starts really having to confront his own personal biases. Book 3 is because they have to team up with the rats to find a cure. And also, I think like he and Luxa have a lot of debates about, are the rats good or bad? And then after he realizes Solivet is the one who unleashed the plague, now he's like, oh, I realized I was viewing the rats as being mostly bad, but with a couple good people like Ripred. And then I was viewing the humans as mostly good, but with a couple bad people like Solivet.
Or Henry, at least.
Or Henry, yes. And then now he's like,
They're all people.
yeah.
Yeah.
One of the moments I think that was really impactful for me in book 3. So basically, one of the rats, Lapblood, loses her mate in the forest, which is really tragic because it was definitely a death that didn't have to happen. It was because they were like, oh, we're hungry. Let's go look for food. Oh, shoot, the plants eat people.
The plants are alive!
Yeah, and so her mate dies in that, and then she's just so emotionally devastated that she retreats into herself. And they say, you have to like clean your fur, otherwise, I don't even remember the context.
I think it's the quicksand or whatever they were
Oh,
in.
right, yeah.
Yeah.
And she's like, I can't do it. Just like, leave me here to die, essentially. Because she's like, my mate's gone. My pups have the plague back home, and I probably won't even see them when I get back. And so she fully falls into this depression. And then Gregor says, I'll clean your fur for you. And I think that moment was really impactful for me because it was him learning how to be empathetic for someone on the quote-unquote enemy side.
Yeah.
He doesn't have an entire lifetime of this culture
Yeah.
of hating the rats. So he's able to break through it, at least temporarily, and say like, I'm looking at this at face value. It's crazy that you guys aren't helping this injured person
Yeah.
who is helping you find a cure for your sickness. Like that's like baseline what's happening here. So I will step in.
Yeah.
And even earlier in that book, like the humans have this powder that like propels fleas.
Yeah.
And I don't remember who, maybe it was Gregor or something, but someone's like, and the rats should get the powder, right? And the humans are all just go silent. And that person is like, I can't understand. Like
I think
you
it
have,
is Gregor.
Yeah, like you
Yeah.
have this powder that helps, and we need them.
The humans are literally ready to just throw aside this alliance because the prophecy says everyone has to work together to find the cure for the plague. And the humans are like, yeah, but we don't want to work with them and we don't want to give them our flea powder. And Gregor's like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
It feels like a very on point, like for the kind of people the Regalians are, and just in like a weird, like, you know, the emotionally charged doublethink of that kind of like political dynamic. Like on the one hand, the Regalians can be like, yes, we need the rats' help. And on the other hand, hold at the same time in their mind, but we're not going to give them the flea powder.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, is as much a condemning action as crafting an antidote for the plague secretly in and of itself.
Holding medicine in your hand, refusing to give it out.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because the flea powder would not contain the plague, but it would at least give them
Prevent the
relief
spread, yeah.
and prevent and slow down the spread of the plague. Because it would just kill the fleas before they could infect anyone. So, woof.
Woof.
And also, on a different level, the human council who are sitting there, some of them know that they will have the cure soon, regardless
that's true,
of this
yeah.
quest.
That's true.
This quest is a scapegoat.
Yeah.
And so, in their mind, they're like, we don't need the rats at the end of the day. We only need to look like we need the rats so our own citizens don't revolt against us. And the entire Underland, all of our allies turn on us.
I mean, I think you could argue that technically even that council is using the prophecy to their advantage.
Absolutely, yeah.
Because they're like, oh, there's a plague. Guess we got to do this quest thing. I mean, it's just so tragic because so many people die on this quest.
Yeah, it's brutal. It's little wonder.
Just like the third Hunger Games book.
I was just thinking that too.
And isn't that fascinating? I wasn't sure if I wanted to bring this up in Hunger Games or here, but like in the Hunger Games, it takes those 3 books for us to reach a point where in Katniss's limited perspective, because Katniss is almost like less centered than Gregor in all of this.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it takes by the end of the 3rd book for her to realize like, oh, the people I'm fighting on the side of, who clearly are fighting a just cause against this oppressive force, they're being led by someone who is willing to do anything to win, like anything.
Mm-hmm.
And just to win like a psychological battle, break the enemy, win the PR war. Like President Coin is willing to kill innocent civilians and kill a bunch of kids and, you know, blame it on President Snow in order to completely eliminate his power base. Mm-hmm. And it takes by the end of that series for us to do like the full circle of like, oh, everyone's complicit in badness. But in Gregor, we get that in the middle. And then we have to like
grapple with it.
Yeah. For like the rest of the series.
Yeah.
Sit with it. You're surrounded by rats and you're surrounded by rats.
Yeah. And that's fascinating. This is aimed at a younger demographic.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. Sometimes you read Gregor's inner monologue, and as an adult, you go like, this main character isn't getting it. Why isn't he getting it? Oh, right, he's 12.
Yeah.
And yeah. I wouldn't get it if I was 12. Clearly I didn't when I read the book.
I didn't go back to the Underland. After book 3, I was like, I'm closing that grate. I'm glad I did go back, though. This last year for... Like, when I think of the last 12 months from date of recording, there's been a lot going on in my life that more than usual is, like, confrontations with, like, people I know going through hard times, people I know having to confront mortality more than usual, me confronting mortality a little more than usual. I'm fine. My family's fine. My friends are fine. It's okay. Don't worry about me.
I'm worried now.
No, you don't have to. It's just, like, people I know or, like, people I know who know people that, like, have confronted like losing people or have lost people or in however brief passing I had with people. Sometimes, you know, that's life. Sometimes people come and go or, you know, they have to linger with the uncertainty of how soon someone may come or go. As well with like financial hardship. Gregor's family is constantly strapped for cash. And I know people who, I mean, with the entertainment strikes and everything in our industry, lots of people are going through it right now.
Yeah.
And so like these past 12 months have been like a lot of like when I sat back and thought about it, because we chugged through Gregor, like we went through this whole series.
Yeah.
When I like sat back and thought about it, like living in Gregor's head, I was like, yeah, much like how Gregor spends a whole year basically with the Underland. You think it's longer, but I think it's literally just a year.
Yeah.
From book 1 to the end of book 5.
If that.
Like I was like, this whole year's been kind of rough in a number of ways as well. And I was like, Gregor taught me a lesson in the sense where it's like I don't know, I guess I already talked about it, where it's like you kind of just have to like take it moment by moment and not overthink it too much or not get too... Just allow yourself to make room for whatever comes at you in life and embrace it as it goes.
Yeah.
And it's really fascinating.
I also think there is also a message of it's good to rely on other people and share the burdens of what you're going through, because at the end of book 3, Gregor is like, my mom has the plague. my dad is still sick. I'm sent back up to care for my 2 younger sisters. What do I do? That's when he finally goes to his next door neighbor, who is one of my personal favorite characters.
Oh, yeah.
And he tells her, he's just like, I'm just going to tell you that I've been going to the Underland. And because in the second and third book is when he is working for her.
Yeah.
And she's always like, something's going on with you. And I know you're not ready to tell me yet, but just know if you ever want to talk about it, I'm here for you. And he's always like, how can I tell her about this crazy world? And he tells her at the end of book 3. And then in book 4 and 5, she's the one who looks after his family while he's off fighting this war. And I think that's really beautiful also.
Mm-hmm. Gregor's family are civilians who get dragged into a conflict that's not their own.
Yeah.
Like literally dragged into the conflict. And they only make it through because of community they formed.
And you know who doesn't have like a truly supportive community with his best interests at heart? The Bane.
Yeah. From the moment of his inception, because of the prophecy, he's just surrounded by people trying to manipulate him.
Yeah.
And we get the sense that like he is inherently not a bad person.
I feel bad for the Bane.
Oh, yeah.
But
There's
he
some
becomes
scenes that
a
are like
terrible person
Yeah.
because of the people around him,
Yeah.
including Rip Red.
And part of it's a little bit of nature. You get the sense he was grappling with some stuff from the get-go,
Yeah,
but a
but
lot
like,
of it's nurture.
He was traumatized as a baby by his father.
Yeah.
The only good presence of his life died defending him.
His mom.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
And then what's the name of the rat who...
Oh, Twirl Tongue.
Twirl Tongue, yes. She's like this rat who kind of sits on the Bane's shoulder and is always feeding him.
literal shoulder demon.
Yeah. Basically feeding him these
Fictions about
promises
himself
of,
and-
Yeah.
oh, you could be the leader of the rats. I think she knows, like, she's like, I couldn't lead the rats, but I could puppet this giant white rat who's part of a prophecy into leading the other rats.
Yeah.
She is what Rip Red refuses to be, for better and for worse.
Yeah.
Because Rip Red refuses to coddle the Bane. He refuses to say anything positive to the Bane, and then Twirl Tongue will only say positive things to the Bane.
Rough.
And it does terrible things to his psyche.
Yeah. It's brutal at the end. Like that final fight between Gregor and Ares and the Bane, like they have a fight in the middle of the book when they're both like in better condition and they both leave some tough wounds on each other, but Gregor gets the help he needs and is able to like recover. But the Bane doesn't have like a whole lot of help, and by that time they're in that final fight, the Bane's like mental state is completely deteriorated.
Yeah,
He still has gaping wounds. He's
when
like
Gregor
exhausted.
cuts off his tail,
Yeah.
basically the Bane loses his emotional safety blanket.
Yeah.
And I was like I feel bad for him, which is not to say that I approve of everything he did.
No, but that's
like,
the
I
great
was
part
like-
of these books. It's a mess of emotions.
Yeah, I was just like, it was like horrifying because I was like, oh, I can imagine like the fragile mental state that you must be in, already in the middle of this war that you don't really quite understand why you're doing this. And then this warrior comes and takes away your anchor to your last shred of mental sanity. I was like, oh my gosh, it's really dark.
Wild stuff.
These books. Well, we are sadly running out of time to talk about Gregor. Does anyone have any last minute thoughts?
You know, despite it all, I'd still visit Regalia, if only to try those tasty, tasty soups.
They do make the food sound really good.
Yeah.
They do. There's a lot of eating,
A lot of feasts.
a lot of feasts, also a lot of starving.
I know. I was going to say it got to a certain point in the books where I was like, wow, the Regalians are really eating really well. And then I thought about how the rats like had a plague and were like starving. And I was like, oh.
Well, you think about how the Regalians stole the rats' fishing grounds.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true.
It's,
More fish soup. Yum, more fish. Shrimp and cream sauce.
where'd these come from? Don't think about it.
Yeah.
Good soup.
Good soup.
We'll be back next week with more Suzanne Collins, and we'll probably reference Gregor a little bit.
Yeah.
But we'll be talking about The Hunger Games, the book, and also maybe the movie a little bit. So tune in for that.
Yeah.
For more uplifting podcasting. Woo!
Oh, I'm sure we'll talk plenty about how much time is spent on love dynamics in the
Oh,
Hunger
I've got
Games.
some thoughts.
Yeah.
I'm
got
very
some thoughts.
excited.
I think it'll be a lighter episode. I'm just gonna call my shot now. I think we'll
Yeah.
Yeah.
Attention listener, if you haven't read the Underland Chronicles, it may say for ages 12 and up, but be warned. Still your heart? Is that the phrase?
Steal?
Steal your heart.
You can steal your heart, or you can be like, be still, my beating heart. So you can do both of those.
You know what? Steal your brain and open your heart to these complicated, traumatized characters.
Yeah.
Let them all in.
Thank you guys for introducing me to the series.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jino, for bringing this home.
You too have a gaping hole in your chest where the ending of the book leapt from your heart and said, goodbye, you will never know closure.
Yay!
Yay, now we have to learn how to live.
And the series is not popular enough to have a lot of good fan fiction. So, there's not that either.
I personally am okay with the ending of Gregor the Overlander.
It's a great ending. It just happens to be so heartbreaking.
Yeah, it is heartbreaking, but at the very least, Gregor and his family did not have to move away from New York.
Maybe.
Well,
a lot of unknowns.
Maybe.
In my head.
At the end of the day, Boots is okay. And that's
true.
what matters.
At the end of the day, Boots learns how to say Gregor's full name.
Yes, we are the cockroaches, and at the end of the day, Boots is okay, and that's all that matters.
Boots.
Apparently, our entire society is based around the health and safety of this one baby.
What are the cockroaches going to do now that they don't have Boots?
Let's just go back to whatever they were doing
legends
before.
About her. And then in the future, she's going to become the new sandwich. She's going to become like the new legend that the Regalians talk about.
Oh.
Especially because her name is like Boots, which is kind of like, I mean, that's not her real name.
Like
but
a sandwich is an object.
Yeah,
And
like
Boots
sandwich is kind of like a
objects.
silly, kind of funny name. And Boots is also a silly, funny name.
Did you also notice that Gregor kept getting gifts in the form of boots?
Oh,
Like that was a
yeah,
thing.
That's true.
Like the state of his boots was like constantly mentioned.
Yeah.
And
I
then
know.
also
Mrs. Cormacci kept giving him shoes.
Yeah, but they were like
they're boots.
They were like boots.
Oh.
Yeah.
I think the last pair she gave him were like nice sneakers.
Yeah.
But before that, there were a couple pairs of boots.
He
And
was
I
always
thought,
like, wow, if I didn't have these boots that Mrs. Cormacci gave me, my toes would be incinerated by acid.
he's like, my boots, but also my boots.
Yeah. Man, it's so sad when he thinks that Boots died. Sorry, I just like jumping
In
on
book 2 or whatever.
Book 2, yeah.
Yeah.
There's also a moment in, I think, book 4 where like Boots falls. And
There's not a single family member that Gregor isn't at one point going, oh no!
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
They're in mortal danger!
Yeah. Well, listener, do not let us deter you from reading this series, even if you think it will be emotionally devastating, because I promise it's worth it.
It's enriching.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Very enriching.
But if you enjoyed this episode, thank you again for listening. You can find more episodes in our back catalog. You can also follow us at Nostalgia Club Podcast on Instagram or send us an email at nostalgiaclubpodcast@gmail.com to yell at us for emotionally devastating you with this series. I don't know.
Tell me all the things I got wrong about the plot of Gregor the Overlander.
Also, if you have the time to leave us a rating and review, it really helps us out. And we love reading your comments, so that's always fun. And yeah, did I miss anything?
Shout out to the Slimers, best underground society.
Snails.
The Slimers, conquering the Fireflies by accident since 1992.
Oh my gosh, I didn't even get a chance to mention this, but as we said, all of the Underland creatures have basically a name for the thing that they do. So like the rats are the gnars and the mice are the nibblers and the cockroaches are the crawlers because they crawl. And then it's revealed that the humans are called by everyone else the killers.
Because their jokes absolutely slay.
Because they make awesome music. That should have been featured in the Percy Jackson show, but it wasn't. And I know that's only like a me thing. Like only I associate the killers with Percy Jackson. But you know what? Everyone else should
We just
too.
gotta get you on to like season 2 or 3.
You just got to look at the bright side. Mr. Bright. You just got to look at Mr. Brightside. He's coming out of his cage and he's doing just fine.
Well, until next time.
Sorry, it was dumb.
Maybe we'll just go out on that.
No, until next time. Please don't let that be the last moment of this episode. End on a high note. Until next time, all of the Underland animals are named like Photos Glow or like Temp or something, you know?
Yeah.
They're named after like an important aspect of their biology or their society, like time and light.
I actually think
except for the bats. who have Greek god names. Where do they get those?
I do think it's fun that every society has their own naming conventions, which makes it a lot easier for you to distinguish who is this person again? Oh, okay, they're a crawler.
Yeah.
Because you're like, oh, their name is Min or whatever for like minute.
Oh, and then the mice all have like Greek like mathematician names.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
I
or
think
just
it's
math
really
based
fun.
Math names? So
Like
the mice have
cube.
math names. And then,
It's cute.
but where are the bats? Did someone drop like Percy Jackson down to the bat kingdom? And they're like, these are pretty good. Athena, that's me now.
My guess is it's something Sandwich brought in.
Probably.
He's
yeah.
like, and this is all this Greek mythology that I like. And the bats are like, oh, neat.
Yeah, Sandwich is like, the bats are awesome. You get cool names. The mice like math. You guys get the fireflies. Ugh.
Listen, I was just excited because one of the bats is named Nike, who is the Greek counterpart to Victoria, the Roman goddess of victory. So I was like, shout out
she
to
makes
Nike. Yeah, and she makes it.
Yeah.
She's a princess, right?
Yeah, she was a princess.
Yeah.
She was really lovely. I was like, well, this person's definitely going to die. But she makes it.
I know,
makes it.
there are definitely a few moments where I was like, no. But she's fine.
Anyway, until next time.
Were you building up to like until next time?
At this point, we're just until next timing to add more
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 points.
comments.
Until next time, here's my analysis about
No, we need one. We need one.
Until next time, things are bad. Things are bad. Things are really, really bad. But things can always get much worse. Something, Warmblood Curse.
Yes.
Yay!